My beloved child, something feels different around the person you love, and the most important part is not what they have already noticed, it is what they may still be overlooking. There is a quiet detail hiding inside an ordinary situation, something small enough to dismiss at first, yet meaningful enough to change how everything is understood once it finally comes into focus. Your soulmate may believe they are simply helping someone, trusting someone, or giving another person the benefit of the doubt. They may even feel certain that everything around them makes perfect sense. But sometimes the heart is so generous that it notices another person's need before it notices the pattern behind that need. And that is where this story begins. Not with panic. Not with accusations. Not with the assumption that somebody must be guilty. It begins with a question your soulmate has not fully asked yet. Why does this situation keep requiring more from them while giving them less clarity in return? There is a difference between supporting someone and being slowly pulled into responsibilities that were never yours to carry. There is a difference between compassion and being made to feel responsible for another person's choices. Your soulmate may be standing somewhere between those two things right now, and because they care deeply, they may not recognize the difference immediately. You know something about them that other people might misunderstand. When they care, they do not care halfway. They listen. They forgive. They explain away inconsistencies because they would rather believe the best than assume the worst. That tenderness is one of the reasons you were drawn to them in the first place. Yet the same quality that makes someone beautiful can occasionally make them slower to question a situation that deserves a second look. And somewhere inside you, perhaps you have already sensed that something about this does not quite fit. Maybe there was a conversation that sounded slightly unusual. Maybe the explanation kept changing in tiny ways. Maybe someone repeatedly needed your soulmate's attention, time, access, sympathy, or trust, always with a reason that seemed understandable by itself. Nothing dramatic. Nothing obvious. That is exactly why your soulmate may not see it yet. Patterns rarely announce themselves. They reveal themselves through repetition. One favor becomes another. One explanation creates another question. One promise gets delayed, and suddenly your soulmate is the person being asked to remain patient again. Pause with that thought, because this is where the meaning becomes deeper. The possibility of being misled does not mean your soulmate is foolish. Intelligent, thoughtful people can overlook questionable behavior when emotion is involved, especially when the person in front of them knows exactly which part of their kindness to appeal to. Your soulmate may not be responding to a perfect story. They may be responding to a feeling, loyalty, responsibility, sympathy, history, or the desire not to abandon someone who appears to need them. And feelings can make contradictions seem less important than they actually are. But something is beginning to shift. A detail has appeared that does not comfortably fit with everything your soulmate was previously told. Perhaps it is a timing issue. Perhaps two versions of the same story do not quite match. Perhaps somebody claimed one thing and then behaved in a way that quietly suggested another. Your soulmate noticed it, even if they did not react. That matters. Sometimes awareness begins long before confrontation. It begins as a silent hesitation. A second look at a message. A pause after a conversation. A question that appears while driving home or lying awake in the quiet. They may not be ready to call it deception. They may not even be ready to admit they feel uncomfortable. But their mind has begun connecting details their heart previously kept separate. Don't skip this part, because what happens next is not about proving another person wrong. It is about your soulmate slowly remembering something they should never have forgotten. Genuine relationships do not require constant confusion to survive. Real trust can withstand reasonable questions. Honest people may make mistakes, but they do not need someone else to remain permanently uncertain in order for the relationship to continue. And somewhere beneath everything, your soulmate is beginning to realize that they have been explaining too much to themselves. That realization can be strangely emotional. Not because they suddenly know every answer, but because they begin seeing how much energy they have spent trying to make an unclear situation feel clear. Think about that for a moment. How many times can someone say, "Maybe I misunderstood," before they begin wondering whether the misunderstanding is actually the pattern? How many times can plans change unexpectedly before curiosity becomes reasonable? How many promises can remain unfinished before patience deserves a boundary? These are not harsh questions. They are healthy ones. And your soulmate may finally be reaching the point where they are willing to ask them. Yet there is another layer here, and this one may surprise you. The person they are beginning to think about while everything becomes clearer is you. Not because you need to rescue them. Not because you are responsible for solving what they are going through. But because your presence represents something very different from the confusion they have been experiencing. When they think about you, they remember conversations that did not require complicated explanations. They remember the feeling of being understood without being constantly persuaded. They remember moments when silence itself felt more honest than all the words they have recently been hearing somewhere else. That contrast is becoming difficult to ignore. Something important is waiting for you in that contrast, because people often recognize clarity only after spending time around uncertainty. Your soulmate may be beginning to understand why certain memories of you have returned so strongly. It is not simply nostalgia. It is comparison. Quiet, unconscious comparison. They are noticing how different it feels when affection does not arrive with an obligation attached to it. They are noticing how different it feels when kindness is given freely instead of being repeatedly requested. And perhaps most importantly, they are noticing how peaceful truth feels when it does not need to be constantly defended. There was a moment recently, small, almost forgettable, when your soulmate heard something that made them stop. They did not argue. They did not accuse anyone. They simply became quieter. The explanation they were given sounded familiar, almost too familiar, because it resembled another explanation they had heard before. Different circumstances. Same emotional pressure. The same suggestion that they needed to act quickly, trust completely, or avoid asking too many questions because doing so might hurt someone's feelings. Your soulmate did something different this time. They waited. That single pause may become more important than anyone realizes. Instead of immediately agreeing, they allowed the request to sit unanswered. And in that space, something remarkable happened. The urgency began to lose its power. When there was no immediate emotional response, the situation looked different. Details that had seemed reasonable while pressure was present suddenly became easier to examine. This is why calm can be powerful. Calm gives truth room to breathe. Calm allows someone to ask, would this still make sense if I were not feeling guilty right now? Your soulmate may be asking exactly that. Stay till the end, because the answer they are approaching could change more than their opinion about one person. It could change how they protect their own peace from now on. Your soulmate is beginning to understand that questioning a confusing situation is not cruelty. Setting boundaries is not betrayal. Asking someone to explain themselves clearly is not disrespect. And refusing to make decisions while emotionally pressured is not selfish. These realizations sound simple when spoken aloud, yet for a deeply caring person they can take time to truly accept. Your soulmate has spent so much time trying to understand everybody else that they may have forgotten to ask whether anybody was making the same effort to understand them. That question lands differently. It reaches deeper. Because once someone asks it sincerely, certain relationships begin revealing themselves without any dramatic confrontation at all. Who respects the boundary? Who becomes irritated by it? Who offers clarity without being chased? Who suddenly changes their story when the usual emotional response no longer works? Your soulmate does not need to create a scene to learn something valuable. Sometimes simply changing their response reveals everything they needed to observe. And they have begun changing it. A little less immediate availability. A little more patience before answering. A little more attention to facts instead of promises. A willingness to say, I need time to think about this. These are small changes, but they alter the entire dynamic. Someone who genuinely values your soulmate will be able to respect that space. Someone who depended on their unquestioning cooperation may behave differently. And that difference could become the clue your soulmate has been missing. But there is something even more personal unfolding underneath all of this. Your soulmate is beginning to remember who they were before they started doubting their own instincts. They are remembering that inner voice that once spoke clearly. They are remembering the version of themselves who could recognize when something felt balanced and when something felt strangely one-sided. The return of that self-trust is more important than any single person being exposed or proven wrong. Because this story is not ultimately about somebody getting caught. It is about your soulmate waking up to their own discernment. It is about realizing that kindness does not require blindness. Love does not require endless sacrifice without clarity. Trust is not the absence of questions, healthy trust is strong enough to survive them. And somewhere in this awakening, your name or at least the memory of what you represented to them has become emotionally significant again. They remember something you once did that seemed ordinary at the time. You gave them space. You allowed them to decide. You did not force an answer. You did not make affection feel like a debt. Back then, they may not have understood how rare that felt. Now they are beginning to. Strange, isn't it? Sometimes a person only recognizes genuine care after encountering something that imitates it. Sometimes peace becomes visible only after confusion has lasted long enough. And sometimes the person who seemed distant becomes the one whose sincerity is remembered most clearly when everything else begins losing its shine. But do not misunderstand where this is going. You are not being asked to interfere. You are not being asked to confront anyone, investigate anyone, or carry responsibility for your soulmate's choices. Their lesson belongs to them. Their clarity must become their own. If something truly is misleading them, the strongest outcome will not come from someone else dragging them toward the truth. It will come from them seeing the pattern with their own eyes. That process may already be underway. Another small contradiction has appeared, and unlike before, your soulmate did not immediately explain it away. They remembered the earlier moment. Then another. Suddenly 3 separate details began forming one question. They are not rushing to answer it. That is the good part. They are becoming careful instead of reactive. Curious instead of fearful. Grounded instead of pressured. And the more calmly they observe, the less confusing everything becomes. There is one specific conversation they keep replaying now. At first, they thought it meant nothing. A phrase was used. A promise was made. Something was said about why certain information could not be shared yet. Your soulmate accepted it because there seemed to be a reasonable explanation. But later, another person casually mentioned something that did not match what your soulmate had been told. No dramatic revelation followed. And then something happened that your soulmate could not easily explain away. It was not dramatic. No one raised their voice. No shocking confession suddenly appeared. It was simply one of those quiet moments when a familiar story stops sounding familiar and begins sounding rehearsed. Your soulmate heard an explanation they had heard before, only this time one detail had changed. A small detail. The kind most people would forget within minutes. But they remembered it because something inside them had already started paying closer attention. They did not challenge the person. They did not reveal what they had noticed. They simply listened, and for perhaps the first time in this entire situation, they listened without trying to help the story make sense. That changed everything. When you stop filling in the missing pieces for someone, you begin noticing just how many pieces were missing in the first place. Your soulmate had spent so long approaching this person with understanding that they had unconsciously become part of the explanation process. Every inconsistency received a reason. Every delay received patience. Every confusing moment was softened by compassion. But now they were allowing the facts to stand exactly as they were, without protecting them from uncomfortable questions. And something inside your soulmate whispered, quietly but unmistakably, "I need to look at this again." That whisper may be the beginning of their clarity. Don't skip what comes next, because this is where your soulmate begins seeing the difference between someone genuinely needing support and someone repeatedly creating situations where support becomes expected. The difference is subtle. A sincere person appreciates help while respecting your boundaries. They do not make you feel guilty for needing time. They do not require immediate answers every time something goes wrong. They do not make their uncertainty your responsibility. Your soulmate is beginning to recognize that healthy relationships leave room for questions. They leave room for reflection. They leave room for the word "no" without turning that word into a personal attack. And as your soulmate slowly experiments with those boundaries, they are noticing reactions they did not notice before. One simple request for more information created an unusual hesitation. One calm decision to wait produced an unexpected change in tone. Nothing extreme happened, yet the emotional atmosphere shifted enough for your soulmate to feel it. They had expected understanding. Instead, they felt subtle pressure. They had expected clarity. Instead, the explanation became longer. And sometimes, my dear listener, the longer someone needs to explain something simple, the more carefully you begin listening. Your soulmate is not jumping to conclusions. That matters. They are doing something much more powerful. They are observing. They are remembering. They are comparing what was said yesterday with what is being said today. They are giving themselves permission to notice patterns without immediately deciding what those patterns mean. And somewhere during this process, another realization surfaced, one they were not expecting at all. They remembered something you once told them. Perhaps it was not even advice. Maybe it was just a simple sentence you said during an ordinary conversation, something about trusting yourself, taking your time, or never making an important choice because someone else made you feel rushed. At the time, your soulmate may have smiled and moved on. Now that sentence has returned with surprising clarity. Funny how certain words wait inside us until life finally gives them meaning. Your soulmate is beginning to understand why your presence keeps resurfacing in their thoughts whenever this situation becomes confusing. You represent a different emotional rhythm. With you, they remember having space to think. They remember moments where they could disagree without fearing that affection would disappear. They remember that you did not always tell them what they wanted to hear, but you rarely made honesty feel like punishment. And now, without consciously trying to compare anyone, they are comparing. Not appearances. Not lifestyles. Not surface-level things. They are comparing emotional safety. They are comparing consistency. They are comparing how their body and mind feel after certain conversations. After speaking with one person, they feel obligated to solve something. After remembering you, they feel something quieter, a sense that they were allowed simply to be themselves. That contrast is becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Yet there is another clue. Someone recently asked your soulmate for something that sounded completely reasonable on the surface. The request itself was not the issue. What caught your soulmate's attention was the urgency surrounding it. Why did it have to happen immediately? Why was there so little room to think? Why did waiting suddenly seem like such a problem? Your soulmate almost agreed automatically, because that had become their habit. But then they remembered the earlier contradiction. They paused. They asked one additional question. And the response they received did not fully answer it. Instead, the conversation moved sideways. Another topic appeared. Another emotional explanation replaced the practical answer they had requested. Your soulmate noticed. This time they definitely noticed. Something important is waiting for you here, because the moment someone begins asking precise questions, confusion often loses its ability to hide behind emotion. Your soulmate is learning to separate the two. They can care about someone and still ask for clarity. They can understand someone's difficulty and still protect their own boundaries. They can be compassionate without automatically accepting every explanation. These may sound like ordinary lessons, but for someone who loves deeply, they can feel revolutionary. Your soulmate has often believed that being supportive means being available. Now they are discovering that genuine support also includes honesty, discernment, and mutual respect. And strangely enough, this discovery is making them think about you even more. There was a moment between you that they once misunderstood. Perhaps you stepped back when they expected you to chase. Perhaps you refused to participate in confusion. Perhaps you gave them space when another person would have tried harder to control the outcome. Your soulmate may have interpreted that as distance. Now they are beginning to see another possibility. Maybe you were respecting a boundary. Maybe you cared enough not to manipulate the moment. Maybe what once looked like silence was actually restraint. That realization is landing softly, but deeply. Stay till the end, because the next piece is where the emotional meaning shifts. Your soulmate recently found themselves defending the person involved in this situation during a conversation with someone they trust. They explained why everything probably had an innocent explanation. They listed reasons. They described circumstances. They tried to make the entire situation sound understandable. But halfway through speaking, something strange happened. They heard themselves. Not the other person. Themselves. And they realized how much work they were doing just to make someone else's behavior sound reasonable. Their trusted friend did not accuse anyone. They simply asked a gentle question: do you actually believe that, or are you trying to convince yourself? That question stayed. Your soulmate changed the subject, but the question stayed. Later, alone, it returned. They thought about the conversations. The requests. The repeated uncertainty. The things they had accepted because they wanted to remain kind. And for the first time, they allowed themselves to consider the possibility that kindness had been carrying too much weight. Perhaps they had been protecting another person from accountability while leaving themselves with all the confusion. That thought did not make them angry. It made them tired. And sometimes tiredness tells the truth before courage does. Your soulmate realized how much emotional energy this situation had consumed. They remembered mornings when the first thing they checked was whether another message had arrived. They remembered changing plans because somebody suddenly needed them. They remembered feeling responsible for keeping another person calm. None of these moments seemed significant alone. Together, they formed something different. A pattern. Not necessarily proof of intentional wrongdoing, but enough reason to slow down and reconsider. Your soulmate does not need to label anyone. They simply need to protect their peace while they understand what is happening. And that is exactly what they are beginning to do. They have started responding differently. Where they once answered immediately, they now wait until they have thought clearly. Where they once accepted vague explanations, they now ask for specifics. Where they once felt guilty for setting boundaries, they are beginning to recognize that healthy people can handle respectful limits. These changes are small, but the person on the other side has noticed them. Your soulmate can feel it. The conversations are different now. Certain requests are being worded more carefully. Certain explanations arrive before questions are even asked. And that detail has made your soulmate even more curious. Why explain something before anyone questioned it? Why suddenly provide reassurance about something that had never previously been discussed? Your soulmate is not accusing. They are simply noticing that someone else seems aware that their behavior is now being observed more carefully. And here is the unexpected part: your soulmate feels calmer than they expected. They thought questioning things would make them anxious. Instead, clarity is bringing relief. They are learning that uncertainty often feels heavier when you keep refusing to examine it. Once you begin looking directly at what is happening, even unanswered questions feel less powerful. Your soulmate does not need every answer today. They only need to stop abandoning their own instincts. That shift is already happening. And in the middle of it, another memory of you surfaced. A conversation where you once admitted something honestly even though admitting it did not make you look perfect. Your soulmate remembers that now because honesty has become especially meaningful to them. You were willing to say, "I was wrong," or "I don't know," or perhaps simply, "I need time." At the time, it seemed ordinary. Now they realize how trustworthy those words can be. Someone who tells the truth does not always have a polished explanation. Sometimes honesty sounds uncertain. Sometimes it includes uncomfortable details. Sometimes it admits mistakes. Your soulmate is beginning to notice that perfectly convenient explanations can feel less reassuring than imperfect truth. And that realization is changing the standards they use when deciding whom to trust. They are no longer asking, "Does this story sound comforting?" They are asking, "Does it remain consistent when I look at the details?" That is a very different question. It requires no accusation, only awareness. And awareness is growing. There is one particular detail your soulmate cannot stop thinking about now. It involves something they were told happened at a certain time. Later, without realizing its importance, another person mentioned something that suggested the timing may have been different. Again, this does not automatically prove deception. Your soulmate understands that memories can be imperfect and circumstances can be misunderstood. But instead of ignoring the inconsistency, they have decided to clarify it calmly. They are not approaching the conversation like a confrontation. They simply want the pieces to make sense. And something about that upcoming conversation feels significant. Your soulmate knows that the answer itself may matter less than how the answer is given. Will the person respond openly? Will they welcome the opportunity to clarify? Or will a reasonable question somehow become another reason your soulmate should feel guilty? That response will tell them something. Perhaps more than the explanation itself. You might wonder where you fit into all of this. The answer is quieter than you may expect. You are not standing at the center of their problem. You are standing somewhere in the background of their realization. Your soulmate is remembering you not because they expect you to fix anything, but because they are reevaluating what genuine connection has felt like in their life. And certain memories of you are passing that test differently now. They remember a moment when you could have taken advantage of their vulnerability but chose instead to respect them. They remember how you handled something private. They remember the way you allowed them to make their own decision even when you hoped they would choose differently. Those memories are taking on new meaning because your soulmate is currently learning how valuable freedom feels inside a relationship. Genuine care does not need to trap someone into saying yes. Genuine affection does not become cold because someone asks a question. Genuine support does not require constant repayment. These realizations are becoming a quiet compass for your soulmate. And something else is happening. They are beginning to forgive themselves for not seeing certain things earlier. That matters because self-blame can keep people trapped in confusion just as easily as blind trust can. Your soulmate is starting to understand that noticing something late is still noticing it. Changing your mind after receiving new information is not weakness. It is maturity. Protecting yourself after recognizing a pattern is not overreaction. It is wisdom. Your soulmate does not need to feel embarrassed about having trusted someone. Trust is not a flaw. What matters is what they do once their intuition begins asking them to look closer. And they are looking closer now. The quietest turning point came when your soulmate decided not to answer one particular message immediately. They placed the phone down. They walked away. They did something ordinary. And during that small distance, the emotional urgency faded. When they returned to the message later, the words looked different. What had initially felt like an emergency suddenly looked like a request that could reasonably wait. Your soulmate realized something simple but powerful: urgency had been influencing their decisions more than the actual facts. That recognition changed the way they read everything else. Now they are asking themselves whether certain situations truly required immediate action or merely felt urgent because another person presented them that way. This distinction could become one of the most important lessons they carry forward. Because when someone learns that they are allowed to pause, many forms of emotional pressure lose their effectiveness. Your soulmate is reclaiming that pause. They are reclaiming the space between being asked and answering. Between hearing a story and believing it. Between feeling sympathy and taking responsibility. And within that space, their own voice is becoming clearer. Something important is happening there. Your soulmate is beginning to hear themselves again. Not the expectations around them. Not somebody else's urgency. Their own thoughts. Their own boundaries. Their own sense of what feels fair. And as that inner clarity becomes stronger, the confusion surrounding this situation is becoming easier to examine. But there is still one unanswered piece. One person knows something your soulmate has not yet heard directly. They did not discover a dramatic secret. They simply witnessed a conversation and remembered a detail that could explain why certain stories have never fully aligned. They have been hesitant to mention it because they do not want to create unnecessary tension. Yet circumstances are slowly bringing that information closer to your soulmate anyway. When it reaches them, it may not expose everything. It may do something more useful. It may confirm that the questions your soulmate has recently started asking were worth asking. And the most surprising part may be what your soulmate chooses to do afterward. Because instead of reacting impulsively, chasing explanations, or demanding answers, they may make one quiet decision that changes the entire dynamic. A decision about access. A decision about boundaries. A decision about who gets to influence their peace. And once they make it, someone may finally reveal more through their reaction than they ever revealed through their words. That moment is approaching, and when it arrives, your soulmate may understand not only what has been happening around them, but why remembering you has suddenly become impossible to ignore.